Thank you, Philippa, and thank you everyone who's joining us at this really critical moment for the UK, but also for the international community. I think it's healthy just to remember why we're talking about COP26. We're talking about COP26 because we've had 25 COPs before that. That's a quarter of a century of talks. And the one really critical thing is that the trajectory of emissions has continued to rise all the way through that period. And for all the symbolic importance of the Paris Agreement in the 6 years since then, the 5.5 years since then, we've seen $4 trillion poured into the fossil fuel economy. This is knowing investment decisions from people who understood what that meant. $144 billion just from Barclays. So that is what has been happening, and the consequence. I mean, we've had science already, but just to sum up, James Bevan, Chief Executive of the Environment Agency, said this just this February. The reasonable worst case scenario for climate sounds like this: much higher sea levels will take out most of the world's cities, displace millions, make much of the rest of our land surface uninhabitable or unusable. Much more extreme weather will kill more people through drought, flooding, wildfires, and heat waves than most wars have. The net effects will collapse ecosystems, slash crop yields, take out the infrastructure that our civilization depends on, and destroy the basis of the modern economy and modern society. If that sounds like science fiction, let me tell you something you need to know. This is that over the last few years, the reasonable worst case for several of the flood incidents the Environment Agency has responded to has actually happened, and it's getting larger. That is why our thinking needs to change faster than the climate, and why our response needs to match the scale of the challenge. So that being the case, and looking at the history of the last 25 years, one thing we might be saying to ourselves is this needs to be different. We can't just keep on doing the same thing because it's not been working. And so what we'd like to see is recognition that the world is in a state of emergency, as the UN Secretary General has called on parties to do. A 10-year emergency plan taking us through to 2030, and recognizing that that plan needs to be informed by those who are suffering the impacts most immediately now and the risks in the future, and making sure those people are heard. Those are the things we'd like to see, but let's be realistic too. And let's look at the UK's role in this. It's a critical role, the presidency. It sets the tone for a lot of the talks. And a key issue is trust. And it's difficult when people see somebody talking about being a climate leader when they don't believe it. When they see someone talking about being a climate leader who's presiding over opening of a new coal mine and more aviation, cutting, this is a critical thing, the cutting to the aid budget. At this time when of global crisis, communities on the front line so exposed, this is making it really hard to make progress in the negotiations. And people should recognize that and take action on that here in the UK. We talk about climate leadership because we've got a relatively ambitious, though completely inadequate, net zero target, but relatively, it's quite an ambitious target. That partly disguises the fact that for the UK, as we've naturally transitioned to a service economy, our emissions naturally come down compared to an economy that is going through a different stage of industrialization. What we don't talk about so much is the fact that 15% of global carbon emissions are funded through the City of London. And that's the most enormous amount. That's really the story of the UK's contribution here. And if you imagine what that means from a young person's perspective, then looking at the City of London financing the stealing of their future. and they're wondering why their parents and their grandparents are working in jobs that are complicit in that. It doesn't make sense. This is part of the mental health crisis we have among our young people. Why do we keep on doing this? And if you look at how effective some of our legislation has been around, let's say, terrorist finance, why is it legal? Why is it legal for companies, pension funds, brokers to knowingly be investing in what we know as catastrophe? And we do know that. For example, we've had a disclosure from the Bank of England earlier this year that its corporate assets portfolio was tracking 3.5 degrees, a catastrophic outcome. They make that disclosure, but nothing happens. We've had Emma Lloyd-Boyd, chair of the Environment Agency, saying, distressingly, the FTSE 100 index is guiding us towards 4 degrees warming. But distressingly makes it sound as though this is some sort of force majeure, something out of our control. But no, these are decisions that we are making. We're investing in 4 degrees through the City of London, through companies within the jurisdiction of the UK. So this brings me to the bit that I'm meant to be talking about, the laws, the legal framework. I'm not sure the answer is making nationally determined contributions legally enforceable. That's the key part, or a key element of the Paris Agreement, because people are choosing their own targets. So what does it really mean to make those, more legally enforceable, and who's going to sue them? What we want to see is governments actually implementing the commitments of the Paris Agreement into national law. We'd like to see a legal and administrative framework to ensure that finance flows, both public and private, are working towards the Paris temperature limit and guiding us there. That just isn't present at the moment. That's really what we want to see. We are about to launch a new legal action against the government. It's a human rights-based claim. We're bringing it in conjunction with 3 young people who say, well, this is my right to life. This is my right to family life. You know that the Paris temperature limit is key to my future, but you're not doing what's needed. And that is a breach of your fundamental obligations to your people. So that's what we want to see. We want to see strong action in the UK, because that then makes it easier for us to influence others. We're not seeing that at the moment. We need to be honest. And finally, what we'd like to see is more emphasis on this key principle, the polluter pays principle. That's not just a principle of justice that makes sure that those who are profiting from pollution actually have to foot the bill. It's also a really sound economic principle, because without that, you have a complete market failure. The costs are borne in the wrong place. And even Rishi Sunak acknowledges that in his the Treasury's net zero report. That is a key problem, the externalities. So yes, more of the polluter pays principle, and let's not imagine that it's all going to be solved at COP26, because it isn't.